Tim Cook, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So here we are at the Apple Store in Brussels, and you've just given a major speech on privacy. This probably is the era where we're so concentrated on privacy, trust, surveillance. In brief, what was your message to the audience today?
My message is that we need to deeply look inside ourselves and ask us what kind of world we want to live in. The fact is now you have more information on your devices than you do in your own homes. And this is a major change over the last several years. And so we're trying to raise the level of awareness and to ask countries all around the world to begin considering legislation over what companies can do and what they can't do.
Well, look, that's really interesting because it's an issue of great controversy, especially in the United States. Not so much here in Europe, where they have a whole new data protection regulations. There's a lot more regulation here, presumably, of all your content than in the United States. Where do you see the parameters of regulation? Because you've called for a federal regulation, right?
Yeah, usually I'm not a big pro-regulation kind of person. I believe in free markets. But I think we have to admit when a free market doesn't work and take an action. And in this case, it's clear that the amount of things that can be collected about you without your knowledge, maybe with your consent, although it's a 70-page legal piece of paper, just isn't reasonable. And these things can be used for such nefarious things. We've seen examples of this over the last several years. And we think it's time now to take this thing and put it under control, because if we don't, the problem gets so large that it may be impossible to fix.
Well, you actually were quite blunt in your speech today, just on this issue. You're talking about profiles, people's profiles. Yeah. Your profile is run through algorithms that can serve up increasingly extreme content, pounding our harmless preferences into hardened convictions. And then you say we shouldn't sugarcoat the consequences. This is surveillance. That is pretty... That's pretty controversial.
Well, it's the truth. And I always get back to that, is what is the truth? And I do see it as a crisis. I see privacy as one of the top issues, the top few issues of this century. I mean, it's to that level. And because of the number of nefarious things that can happen, and I advocate to put the user in control, completely in control of their data in a very transparent manner. And, and there's a lot more behind that than that, but that's the spirit of it.
And you said
your data is yours.
And you
it's
said
not mine.
If we don't get a grip, and you're saying the tech industry doesn't get a grip, if the market doesn't get a grip, then either it can get out of control or others can impose regulations at some point. I mean,
but just to be clear, though, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
I'm not saying this to the tech industry. This is broader than the tech industry, because many, many firms out there are collecting data. And so and there's a whole data industry called the data broker kind of industry, right? That sole objective is to gather data on people. And so I made a broad speech about a very key policy element that I think is critical to every country in the world and our future as a society.
And I'm going to get into that in a second. But, I mean, obviously, the big content providers have been under the microscope, whether it's Facebook, particularly with the Cambridge Analytica. I mean, tens of millions of people's data being shared and monetized without their knowledge or their permission. And so it's a big deal. And I wonder how you think at least those platforms, those parts of the industry will take what you've said. Because the other thing you said, again, was very blunt. You've talked about the fantastic opportunities provided by this technology, but you said at the same time, we see vividly, painfully, how technology can harm rather than help. Platforms and algorithms that promise to improve our lives can actually magnify our worst human tendencies. Rogue actors, even governments have taken advantage of user trust to deepen divisions, incite violence, and even undermine our shared sense of what is true and what is false. I mean, this is the opposite of a brave new world. This is really a dark vision.
It's the realization that a lot of the things that have been created have some downside to them. And now they have, and as a part of the technology, there's an amplification effect. And so I talked about gossip in the speech. You know, gossip has existed since man was created. But it's a little different if it's you and I gossiping versus if I can go on something and all of a sudden the world is in on this. And you have things like cyberbullying and a lot of other things that really affect deeply people. And so this is my concern. And I'm not speaking to one or two companies. I'm speaking to all of us, the broader worldwide community, because it's not just one or two companies that are collecting data, it's everyone. And we have to realize that that data is precious and should be treated as such. And we've got to ask ourselves, do we really need all of this?
I agree with you. We ask ourselves that a lot. We the people who are implicated now and who are being sort of invaded, I think, in many of these invasive practices. But I guess what I want to ask you is this. Many of the companies who you might be including in your speech use content as their profitability. That is what it is. You click, you sell, you get money. That's what data is often used for. It's not the case really with Apple. So perhaps you could stand up there and say that, and it wouldn't affect your bottom line as much as it might affect some of the others. Is that a valid point?
No, because it's a valid point that our business model is different, yes. But you have to, but cause and effect is very important here. So why is it different? It's because we've elected, our values tell us to go in a certain direction. And those values have always been, this is not in the last year or so, we've always been very deeply committed to people's privacy. We've always viewed it as, in the United States, we viewed it as a fundamental civil liberty. I mean, these things are guaranteed to us, because our forefathers had the vision to know how important this was. So that to us, it's a basic human right.
So you just decided not to share, sell, or otherwise disseminate data.
And so that's right. And so we made that decision. It was against our values, and therefore that derives a different business model. Now, I'm not saying, though, I want to be clear on this. I have no personal issue, and Apple has no issue with digital advertising. Digital advertising can be good. We may find something that we want. That is good. It's the formation of a deep, detailed profile that knows more about you than you may know about yourself, because it has information about all of your browsing, perhaps all of your purchases, maybe some of your health information, and maybe who your friends are, maybe who their friends are, maybe the messages that you've sent, maybe what you've talked about. I mean, these things, you think about all of this information that is out there, it is too much. This is too much. This should not exist.
Before I get into some of the trade and other issues, particularly with China, particularly in the Trump era, with tariffs and all the rest, I just want to ask you, you have also, you say it's too much, but you've also said that you thought you were quite disciplined in your screen use, in your device usage. But then you've developed a new app, right? Screen Time?
Screen Time. This is very important. You know, for us, we've never wanted people to spend all their time on a device. We want people to live. And you don't really live if you're always in a digital world. I mean, I get more out of our dialogue here than I'll ever get out of reading something online. It's that human interface that I think is so valuable. And so we developed something called Screen Time because we knew that people were getting uptight about both themselves and maybe more importantly, their kids and how much time they were spending. So now this started shipping in the fall, and this builds on all the parental controls we've had in for years. Now you can actually monitor what your kids are doing. You can get a report every week, or you can check it more often if you want, to see where they're spending their time, how much time they're spending. You can control certain apps from them not having access to. You can give them a budget for how much time they can spend a day. And if they hit that amount in order to spend more, they have to come back to you and ask you for permission. Now, I think that was job one, to do focused on kids. But frankly, what I learned, and I think many of your viewers will learn too, is that they spend too much time too. Adults. Because as I looked at my information, we tell you how many times you pick up your iPhone every day. We tell you how many notifications you get. We tell you how much time you're spending on your phone. And for me, the number of times I picked up my phone and the number of notifications I got were unacceptable. I mean, it just didn't make any sense at the end of the day when I backed up and said, is this how I should be living my life?
Did you change your habits?
I whacked it, yes. And I hope everybody takes a hard look at their habits. And it's there's something about having this moment of truth. You can't kid yourself, I'm only spending a few minutes a day, because the facts are right there. It's powerful.
So let's get to the Trump era. There's been a lot of upheaval, disruptions, some say chaos. A lot of business leaders have approved of his tax reforms, like yourself. I believe you like the fact that the corporate tax and being able to bring money back to the continental United States. How have you dealt with President Trump and this administration to your advantage? For instance, you were able to get him to exempt sort of tariffs on technology that Apple uses, like Bluetooth, when it comes to China and all the rest of it.
Well, I do believe the corporate portion of the tax cut that came out in January is great for the U.S. economy, because I think you're already seeing people invest more in the U.S. I think it is creating jobs, and I think it does have a long tail to it. It's not a short kind of sugar high. And so I applaud them for doing that, and I think that people will see more and more returns from that. In terms of how do I deal with it, I believe in engagement. I believe in engaging with everyone, whether I agree or disagree. I think you should engage even more when you don't. I think that's one of the issues with our society today, is people tend to go in their silo and they only talk to people that agree with them. And I never see that. So I engage on everything. I engage because there's some policy things that are being discussed that are incredibly important to Apple, like DACA is an example of this, and immigration more broadly. I think, fundamentally in human rights issues, we talked about tax, environmental issues, this privacy regulation that I'm talking about. And so there's these enormously large, important things. And I do feel both an obligation, both personally as an American and as the head of Apple, to represent us in these policy discussions. What I don't do is I don't participate in politics. I disdain politics. And so I steer clear of that. What I focus on is the policy. And in terms of trade, to just add a little bit on this, is I think these, when I back up and look at this, the trade that's going on between two countries, particularly U.S. and China, you have two very large countries, very complex arrangement between the two. The agreement had not been touched in a long period of time. It does need to be updated. There is no doubt about that. There's some big topics that need to be addressed. I am not a fan of tariffs because I don't see the issues as tariff related. And so this is an area of divergence Are
you concerned because the president talks about another round of tariffs, even higher than the previous ones? Are you concerned that maybe some Apple products and things that you depend on might get caught up in the next round?
I would encourage the administration not to do that, because I don't think it would be good for the United States. And I don't think it would be good for China either, by the way. And I think the reality is, as I see it, my experience says that in order for the world to do well, the two largest economies have to do well, and that's the United States and China. And so I think there's this mutuality about the destination of these two countries, and I think it's inescapable that is the case. And so what I am hoping for is more dialogue, significant dialogue, the issues being discussed and addressed, and moving forward.
You had mentioned, I think, something about in regard to this, and President Trump sort of tweeted back, build more plants here now. Stop doing as much business with China and building so much there and manufacturing so much there. Bring it back to the United States. That was a little skewer.
Yeah. Here's what we do today is The iPhone is really not made anywhere. It's made everywhere. That's the truth. It's developed in the United States. There's many components that come from the United States, like a lot of the different silicon. The glass of the iPhone comes from Kentucky. The Face ID module is coming from Texas. There's technology from France and Germany and the UK. And there's technology from Korea. There's technology from China. And so we are using things from all the different countries. So everybody is gaining from iPhone. And in particular, it's been a job engine in mobile app development. And so if you look at the total number of jobs Apple's created in the US, it's 2 million. I mean, this is huge. We're a job engine. And we've also created a lot in many other countries, including the European countries that are represented here today. And so I'm a believer in, finding the best around the world and utilizing those skills and know-how and technology, because we make global products.
You talk about a lot of the European countries that are based here, and you talk about quality of life and economy and jobs, not just in the United States, but globally as well. And, Tim Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web, is very concerned with the growing inequality that technology seems to be exacerbating. So I guess I wanted to ask you, because you're right here in Brussels now, you are one of the biggest taxpayers in the United States, but the Europeans want you to start paying taxes to Ireland, for instance, where you brought a lot of people and business. Both you and the Irish government are challenging that. Why?
Because the law in the past was very clear that tax revenue, which is on essentially the intellectual property that Apple has created in the United States, that tax should be paid to the United States. That was the law and is the law. And until that law changes, we will follow the law. Now, I understand there's a lot of emotion around it and a lot of points of view that are valid points of views that perhaps the allocation should be different for multinational companies. And we embrace that conversation, by the way, and are actively, constructively participating in those. But I think it's important that companies today follow the law and pay taxes where it's due. And also, fundamentally participate in the discussions about how the tax system may change going forward.
Are you concerned, given all the privacy issues and the security issues around your technology, are you concerned about this rather controversial report that was in Bloomberg that suggested, based on a number of anonymous sources, that the Chinese military, a special unit of the Chinese military, had infiltrated little chips into servers that were used, among others, by Apple and Amazon? Is there any evidence to that? I know that you've pushed back on that very strongly.
Yeah, I want to be unequivocal on this. That article, the part about Apple, is 100% a lie. It is completely inaccurate. There is no truth behind it. We never found a malicious chip in any servers. We never reported something to the FBI like that. The FBI never contacted us about anything like that. And so I think that casts doubt on the broader story, but that's for somebody else to look at. Amazon has also made comments, as you can see. And my view is they need to retract that article, because this is not doing anybody any good to have fake information out there. It doesn't do them any good. It doesn't do the cause any good. Cybersecurity is an important topic, a really important topic. And we should put all of our energies into protecting, the companies, the country, but not chasing a ghost.
Is it something that you were ever concerned about? Is it something that Apple ever looked into or would continue to look into? Has it ever been a concern?
I sleep with an eye open. I sleep with an eye open. And so in that world, in the cybersecurity world, you want to employ people there that are so skeptical of everything in life that they're always thinking, because in this world, you have to stay a step ahead of all of the hackers. Hackers used to be the guy in the basement, doing some stuff. Now, hackers are sophisticated enterprises. And so it's like running on the treadmill, and you keep running or you fall off the back. And we need to keep running toward real topics, not fake ones.
Let's get to, you mentioned DACA. Obviously, one of the areas of disagreement you have with the Trump administration and the president is on immigration. And last month, we saw a really quite alarming article, a report, about how the immigration crackdown is harming high-tech community, high-tech job, and even low-skilled jobs. People on both ends of the spectrum, employers, cannot recruit enough people, workers, to fill their jobs. How dire a situation is it?
Well, I'm a deep believer in that the power of the United States. One of the many great things about our country, but one of those is that we're accepting of people from everywhere. And they all come together and they have the opportunity to, build their business or do whatever they want. And we give them the freedom to do that. And that's always been a power. And so that's the world I would love to continue for the country. I think on DACA, I'm very emotional on this. We have 300 folks in Apple that are here on DACA. And these guys are living one court order away from a problem. And I'm deeply worried about it. I've continually push on this and talk about it. I believe, based on my conversations, that the vast majority of people in both parties want to address this. It hasn't been addressed yet. I'm optimistic that it will be, but I'm going to be pushing until it's done. You'd mentioned inequality earlier, and I just want to comment a bit on that. I am deeply worried about inequality as well. And I do believe globalization has created more inequality. And so I'm not one of these guys that say, I'm not involved in this. I think it has created more. And I think it's up to us us that have benefited. You and I have benefited from globalization in a big way. I mean, your whole show is in a way would not exist without globalization.
But so too have hundreds of millions of people around the world been lifted out of poverty by globalization.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And I am so happy to have participated in that. But when I look in the mirror, what I see back is that some people haven't. And it's not just that they haven't, they've actually been hurt by it. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to help address that issue. And to me, that is about education. So I look at my own life. In my own life, I came from a very lower middle class family. And the way you moved through society was education. And you counted on having a great public school down the road with teachers that really cared deeply for you, with access to enough stuff that you could really learn and take the next move and the next move. And I'm deeply worried that we're not providing that for lots of people today. And that should not be the case in a country as wealthy as the United States and many other countries around the world as well.
To the specific issue that the administration tends to say, the more foreigners we have, the less jobs Americans have, the less good it is for Americans, etc. But these reports seem to suggest that not being able to recruit workers is harming the GDP of this country, is harming the economy of this country.
What I think is that many people coming in that have immigrated in are creating jobs because they have ideas to create a new company. Or they're entering a company like Apple and participating on the next big thing that creates more jobs. And so what I see is there's lots of people with significant skills coming into this country that add to GDP. And so I think not only from a humanity point of view, which I feel deeply, but from a sheer business point of view, immigration is an add to GDP. Yes, it's very true that the border has to be controlled, right? And so I'm not at all saying come one, come all. There has to be a control and a way of doing it. But the truth is, the United States needs large immigration to continue to grow. I mean, people like me at some point the baby boomers are retiring, and we need more people working.
You talked just a moment ago about growing up, and you describe it as a lower middle class environment. You're gay, and you came out very proudly. It's quite rare, it's quite brave for CEOs, especially in Silicon Valley. It doesn't happen that much. What do you make of, do you believe the environment has become better, more tolerant for gay people, let's say just in your industry? And secondly, what do you think of the current debate by the administration over how to redefine transgender? They're saying, forget what we thought a year ago, now we're going to say only identified by the sexual organs with which you're born.
Yeah. My strong view is everybody should be treated with dignity and respect. And that's the way I look at everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their religion, their gender, their ethnic history, regardless of their gender identity, anything, right? And so that's the way I look at things. I was public because I began to receive stories from kids who read something online that I was gay, and they were going through being bullied, feeling like their family didn't love them, being pushed out of their home, very close to suicide. I mean, just things that really just pulled my heart. And I started saying, you know, I am a private person. And so I've kept me to my small circle. And I started thinking, you know, that is a selfish thing to do at this point. I need to be bigger than that. I need to do something for them and show them that you can be gay and still go on and do some big jobs in life, that there's a path there. And so that is the reason I did it. I did not do it for other CEOs to come out. It wasn't even in my mind. I was the first, which is kind of shocking that I was the first. Now I think
you're proud of it.
I'm very proud of it. I am very proud of it. Yes, absolutely. To me, it is God's greatest gift to me. Because in doing so, I learned what it was like to be in a minority. And all minorities are not the same. Everybody has their own experience. But the feeling of being in a minority gives you a level of empathy for other people who are not in the majority. And you begin to look at life a little differently. It also, for me, and this is very good for being the CEO of Apple, because I take a fair amount of shots from different people along the way, is having thick skin, which comes out of being gay as well, was actually pretty beneficial for this role.
Did you face the same kinds of bullying and hardship that you described seeing from other people writing to you when you were growing up?
I was fortunate to be in a loving family.
And they knew?
And at different points in time. I wouldn't want to go into exactly when and that sort of thing. And so I never had the situation of kids that I've now met and talked to personally that are being pushed out of their homes. I've never had that. And it's so personally, I can't say I have an experience there. The bullying part, of course, this happens to almost 100% of people out there, and not just gay people. It's basically anyone in the minority in some way.
Anyone's a little different.
Yes, and we have to get beyond this as a society. These irrelevant differences in people, they really don't matter.
It is extraordinary to look in and see how huge a cultural debate the transgender issue is. I mean, just bathrooms. It's almost like it's swayed an election. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's huge. It's a huge, huge topic. And I wonder whether that caught you by surprise and what you make, as I said, of the potential for this administration to decide to declare and define transgender as the sexual organs you were born with.
It doesn't surprise me, unfortunately, because I grew up and I saw discrimination my whole life, right? I saw it with African Americans and their fight for their rights. I've seen it with women. It was only 100 years ago that women were given the right to vote. And so, I mean, you think about this and you go, what? Women weren't allowed to vote? Who came up with that? I mean, and so I think each generation has a responsibility to increase and expand the definition of human rights. And I feel that. And I think what I can do is not only for the gay community and the transgender community, but I want to help women. I want to help African Americans. I want to help Hispanics. I want to help immigrants. I want to help religious minorities. Because at the end of the day, the problem, it comes down to one thing: treating people with dignity and respect. I mean, at the basic, that is what it is. I look at that and go, oh my God, if in one day somebody could declare, everyone treat everybody else with dignity and respect, the world would be totally different. Wouldn't it be great?
You mentioned Steve Jobs in your speech, and he's obviously the lodestar, and that'll never end. His legacy is all over the place. I wonder what you think your legacy is, even though you're not about to retire. But what would you say that you have done that's legacy?
The truth is that I don't think about that. That is the honest to goodness truth. Is I think if you focus on that, you begin to fixate internally and be focused on yourself. And I'm first of all, I'm not good at it, and I don't believe I should be doing that. I think I should be focusing on other people, and so I don't really think about it. I just do stuff, and
you do stuff.
I hope that some of the stuff that I do winds up helping other people. And if I do that, and somebody says at my funeral that he was a good man, a good and decent man, then I feel like that's a good life.
You know, his widow, Laureen Powell Jobs, is addressing a very key issue of our time, which is the press and how to support the press. And she's used a lot of her money to buy The Atlantic and to try to, revive that. And we see Jeff Bezos has done that with The Washington Post. Well, how do you assess that?
Well, I love Lorraine, and I love Steve, and I applaud all the work she's doing with Emerson Collective, which is her organization. She's working on everything from climate change to education, focusing on the news, as you just said, and so many other things that are immigration that are so important to our times, and I applaud her for doing that.
Now, I could end there, Tim, but I want to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
Apple Park, huge, wonderful, new, shiny, glassy building. I've read that it's being very heavily integrated with designers at every level of the operation there. In fact, Johnny Ive, the designer-in-chief, just gave an interview and described it. And he was asked whether this might be the precursor or the incubator for a future Apple product, the autonomous driving system. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can tell you that we love Apple Park. I moved in there in January, and I had such high expectations for it. But it's exceeded all of those. The thing I didn't appreciate before I moved, I knew it was going to be fantastic, but I didn't know it was going to make the company seem smaller. But when you're all in one building, or a significant number of people in one building, you see so many more people during the course of the day, and all of a sudden, you feel really small again. And I think there's a privilege in doing that.
And the autonomous driving system?
We're working on autonomy. We are working on autonomous systems. On the software side of it, to be very clear. And because we think autonomy is a core technology, but it can be used in many different ways, right? It's people automatically think about it in the car sense, but the autonomy itself can be used in so many different ways that I wouldn't want to give you the list, but it can be used in a lot of different ways. And it turns out that autonomy is probably the mother of all machine learning projects. And so you also build a lot of skills in working on autonomy that can be used across the company.
Tim Cook, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for inviting me.